Thank you very much, everybody, for a number of reasons. First, for inviting me to this exciting meeting. Second, for letting me experience the knowledge of your advanced stage of understanding and treating and dealing with the problems with the pediatric hemoncs and transplants. And third, for the fantastic social program that you have been offered. We had a wonderful meal last night with a lot of toast, with a lot of drinks, and this is why I think you should probably apologize if my talk would not be totally consistent with the rest of the context. Having said that, the title of my talk is The Transplant in Severe Aplastic Anemia. And so this is the table of the contents. We'll have a bit of background. Then I will describe the outcome of matched family donor transplant and immunosuppression in children and in adolescents. Then I would go through the most relevant studies, not so many indeed, regarding the outcome of frontline match-unrelated donor transplant in pediatric age. Then a little bit of alternative transplants in pediatric age, and then I'll provide the algorithm which I think is reasonable to propose to pediatric hematologists dealing with this rare disorder. Let's start with the background. Aplastic anemia is a rare disorder. The incidence is 1 in a million, and in children is less than 1 in a million. There are some ethnical differences. In Far East, the incidence is far higher. So I wouldn't figure out exactly how that situation could be in Russia because of the big extension of your own country, stretching from Europe to Far East. But I would say that I expect that there is at least one patient per million inhabitants per year in the Western world. So in pediatric AA, you have a high proportion ranging from 56 to 81% of refractory cytopenia with hypocellular marrow, which is a kind of disease which is concealing its true nature, and it's very similar to aplastic anemia. Strangely enough, as compared to adults, very severe aplastic anemia has a better outcome. That's come from a German study published years ago in Blood. So very severe aplastic anemia fares better than severe aplastic anemia. And most importantly, there's a far high rate of undetected genetic marrow failure diseases in pediatric age as compared to adult age. It has been calculated that between 5 to 10% are hidden misdiagnoses, inherited marrow failure diseases like Fanconi anemia, telomere diseases, congenital A-megakaryocytic thrombocytopenia, and so on. Again, another point which is probably the most critical one is that the aims of treatment can be different as compared to adults. Because, I mean, if you can be happy to get survival in a 70-year-old patient, that would not be the case in a patient's age 10 or 12. Because in this particular case, the aim of treatment needs to be more ambitious and more quality of life oriented. So this is the list of the frontline treatment options that are available in AA. So we discuss of matched family donor transplant, of immunosuppression, and of match-unrelated donor transplant that I put not by chance amongst the first-line options. So this is one of the studies that we ran within our group in European Bone Marrow Transplant Society within the Severe Aplastic Anemia Working Party, which I have the honor to chair, and is about 563 patients aged 0 to 12, collected in the EBMT database from 2000 to 2009, and this is the survival curve. You see that this is the overall survival of first-line matched family donor transplant as compared to immunosuppression upfront. Data are very similar. There is no statistical difference. But if you look at the event-free survival, so if you locate within the evaluation systems, death, of course, relapse, non-response, clinical PNH appearance, secondary malignancies, and transplant after immunosuppression. So if introduce some qualitative indicators of survival, then the story is fairly different. This is the event-free survival of the bone marrow transplant, and this is the event-free survival of the immunosuppression. So 33% with a highly significant difference, meaning that only 1/3 of children treated with immunosuppression upfront do survive with good quality of life. What about GVHD, which is a nightmare in aplastic anemia? You know, GVHD is helpful in leukemia, but we don't need GVHD to fight non-leukemic cells. And in aplastic anemia, through aplastic anemia, we don't have leukemic cells. GVHD, acute GVHD rate in this study was 8%, and chronic was 6%. Another important issue in children, which was different, this is with transplant performed after the failure of immunosuppression. We'll go back to that in a minute. So if we think of secondary malignancies, which are pretty important, as we've heard from Dominique in a very good lecture before, is that in the matched family donor, the incidence of secondary malignancy is very low, but in those patients who did have immunosuppression, failed immunosuppression, and needed to be rescued, the transplant, the incidence, although not significantly higher, is still higher, 3%. If we shift a little bit higher in terms of age and we move to adolescents, so if we consider the stretch of age between 12 and 18, and we did the same study in the BMT, you see more or less the same data. Overall survival is pretty much the same in the immunosuppression as compared to the matched sibling donor transplant setting, with no statistical difference. But again, it's a mirror if you look at the event-free survival, meaning that immunosuppression-treated patients do really have poor quality survival. And again, about 1/3 of adolescents treated with frontline immunosuppression do not have a very good quality of life. Also in this case, GVHD, this is 8% for the chronic. Look at the secondary malignancies in patients treated with immunosuppression after having failed, treated with transplant after having failed immunosuppression. The rate, sorry about that. Oh. No, I can't go back. Anyway, so I might ask your support to go a little, one slide backward, please. Okay, I found it. So you see that the rate of second tumors in patients who had immunosuppression and who failed immunosuppression and then needed to be rescued with transplant is 21% with the cumulative incidence at 7 years. So it's a high figure, very high figure. Asking of conditioning regimen, what type of conditioning regimen we should use in a patient who has aplastic anemia. So the classical conditioning regimen, which has been on EBMT for a long time, is high-dose cyclophosphamide alone plus ADG. A recent study from the CIBMTR demonstrated that rabbit ATG is better than horse ATG because it's more immunosuppressive and so reduces acute and chronic VHD. But we have other opportunities in conditioning regimen that can be used in patients aged between 30 and 50, but also in the youngers. And this is the case of low-dose cyclophosphamide. This is a recent study which provided good results. But most interestingly, I would say that the most effective conditioning regimen is the FCA, which is fludarabine plus cyclophosphamide plus ADG, but also the FCC, which is exactly as above, the same dose, but with Canpath instead of ATG, and which is probably the conditioning regimen that turned out to show the highest, the best results in terms of graft failure, with only 5.9% in the adult population. So another important question regarding the transplant in aplastic anemia is which source of cells to use. We know that in many countries, also European and US countries, the tendency is to use peripheral blood stem cell because, I mean, it's easier to get them and it's less dangerous for the donors. But in aplastic anemia, this is not the case. So the preferred source of cells to be used is bone marrow. And this is because, as you see here, in this study from Andrea Bacigalupo, the survival of patients treated with bone marrow over those treated with peripheral blood was significantly higher. So basically, using peripheral blood negatively affect the overall survival of the transplanted patients. The GVHD prophylaxis should be carried out with methotrexate plus cyclosporin A. I did mention before the role of the transplant in patients who failed immunosuppression up front. And you see this is the green line, that overall survival in this special category is pretty good, 78%, no statistical significant difference. But if you look again at event-free survival, there is a worse outcome, and so meaning that patients can be very well rescued if they failed frontline immunosuppression, but the quality of life after this intervention is still not so satisfactory. So at this stage of the talk, I would like to summarize what all these studies that I have mentioned do really say. Matched sibling donor transplant, as we all know, is an excellent treatment with an excellent overall outcome. Immunosuppression frontline provides an excellent overall survival, around 90%, but event-free survival ranges between 30 to 40, meaning that 2/3 of the patients have limitation of quality of life. There is a not negligible risk of late malignancies, particularly in the adolescents, but there's a good chance, if you fail immunosuppression, to be rescued with hematopoietic stem cell transplantation. Importantly, amongst responders to immunosuppression, also partial responders are included, and this is quite important. Think of this normal action of life, like playing football at the school pitch, or having a normal biking race of kids, or if you think of adolescents attending a concert. You do think that these normal life activities can be easily performed in a safe way if you have a platelet count of 40 or hemoglobin 9 on 1,000 neutrophils, maybe on cyclosporin. Hey, I think that we should think whether there are better options than immunosuppression frontline for this specific category of patients, which are pediatric patients. I stated clearly, in adults it's fairly different, but we have to be more ambitious as pediatric hemato-oncologists. So one of the alternatives, which has been recently published by the NIH group, is the addition of eltrombopag, which is a stimulator of the hematopoietic system, to the classical immunosuppression. And this is the result of the study that Daniel Townsley published on behalf of the NIH group on New England last month. So the addition of eltrombopag, 150 milligrams, to the classical immunosuppression provided an overall response of 87% at 6 months, a complete response of 37%, and a clonal evolution risk of 5%, all high-grade MDS. Neutrophil recovery was on day 47, which means a little lower than 2 months, and transfusion independence was achieved within 1 to 2 months. This study was divided in 3 cohorts, and cohort 1 was that who provided the most satisfactory results. And in this cohort, eltrombopag was added on day 1, and you see that overall response is 95%, complete response 59%, complete response means all the 3 series close to normal, and neutrophil recovery was on day 35. So these are encouraging results, and we have in our group, in EBMT, a prospective randomized trial who aims to compare the 2 arms in a randomized, so getting a level of evidence a little bit higher, but the study is still ongoing. I hope I'm going to give you the results at the next meeting of your society. So then now let's move to what I still consider a first-line option in children, which is the match-unrelated donor transplant. So this is a UK study along with a EBMT participation conducted in 19 consecutive children with a median age of 8.6 years, with the famous conditioning regimen FCC, fludarabine, cyclophosphamide, and Campar. You see that this is the overall survival of unrelated donor as compared to the matched family donor. And you see that there is no statistical difference, 96% versus 91%. But if you look at event-free survival, data are pretty similar. So the unrelated donor provides also an excellent quality of life, as indeed the matched family donor does. But the matched family donor transplant is considered the golden standard treatment for aplastic anemia. Our data were confirmed by another study in which you see that frontline transplant, this study included a mixture of cases, provided better results, although not significantly, than frontline immunosuppression. When we compared in our study the related donor transplant with the unrelated donor transplant, so another study, this is another study, a Danish group, which actually showed the same results, that related donors does not make difference in terms of overall survival as compared to unrelated donors. One thing that may be raised is that, okay, you do the transplant, but by the time you make a diagnosis, you find a donor, you really consistently do the transplant, there's going to be a long stretch of time. And over this time, the patient can get infected because, I mean, neutrophil won't rescue. And this is this is really a critical point. And we compared in our study the time to neutrophil recovery in unrelated donor versus matched sibling donor. And we see that although there was a difference, because this is about 4 months and this is about 3 months, the difference was not significant. But this issue was more accurately explored by an Irish group that compared the recovery of matched unrelated donor transplant with the matched sibling donor transplant and with immunosuppression, which is that line. You see that platelet recovery is slower at the lower level, and you see that neutrophil recovery is slower and at the lower level. So basically, these findings were consistent to those we found. Neutrophil recovery is not a major problem if you do a matched unrelated donor transplant in aplastic anemia. Still comparing the outcome of unrelated donor transplant with immunosuppression, we confirmed what I have already shown you before, that in terms of overall survival, there's no difference, 96 versus 94. But in terms of the event-free survival, which again points to the quality of life of the patients, there is exactly the same difference we've seen in our retrospective studies before, thus pointing to the fact that, I mean, you're not providing a good quality of life treatment if you provide frontline immunosuppression to children. Of note, amongst these patients, you have those who have partial responders, which are 3/4 or 2/3, depending on the time from the diagnosis, as confirmed by this Korean study published 3 years ago in Hematologica. Similar to what we've seen, this Korean group confirmed that the quality of life in frontline transplant is far better than in frontline immunosuppression. So we have already confirmation of the study we have done. The last comparison of this study we ran within our group with the UK colleagues is the comparison of the matched unrelated donor upfront with the matched unrelated donor done after the failure of immunosuppression. And you see that in terms of overall survival, you have significant difference. The first one is better. But you do also have difference in terms of event-free survival. So also the quality of life is better in matched unrelated donor. Meaning that there are no, in my view, good reasons for waiting to fail immunosuppression frontline to be rescued with a transplant. Because you've seen that this transplant is loaded by high rate of GVHD and late malignancies. So there's no really need for doing that. Of course, it's not gold what shines, that's what we say in our country. And so there are limitations of this study. First of all, it's a retrospective study, although with matched historical controls, so meaning that this is not the top level of evidence. Groups were not homogeneous in terms of conditioning and serotherapy, so conclusions cannot be that definitive. One important thing is that the availability of a matched unrelated donors is not very uniform throughout the world, because Caucasian patients have higher chances to find a donor, whereas blacks from South America or Central America, they are far lower, and other ethnicities have intermediate likelihood, meaning that, as I said before, matched unrelated donor may not be available for everybody. In addition, there are caveats. You have to start the research of the donor soon after diagnosis, and you have to evaluate by the preliminary research that the transplant is feasible, not the donor available. Transplant feasible, having the bag in your unit and infuse it, which makes a difference. And this has to be done in 2-3 months since diagnosis, just not to leave the patients uncovered towards infection. Then there are donor issues. You have to know that patients, donor aged above 45, have a worse impact on survival, And of course, non-multiporous women has to be selected for the risk of GVHD. And then, of course, you have to discuss all these pros and cons with the family and the patient himself. But having said all that, if you have an 8 out of 8 or 10 out of 10 matched family donor, unrelated donors, suitable and available to do the transplant within 2 to 3 months, well, this transplant is an excellent first-line option in children, and there are no reasons for not offering this option under these conditions. So this is a survey about the type of conditioning. They don't differ very much as compared to that from matched sibling donor. The most popular at the moment is the FCC, which I already explained you before, or the FCA, which is the one which is recommended by the BMT. In the MUD context, the use of low-dose TBI is recommended for multiple transfusion patients for those aged above 14, and the graft failure rate is pretty much the same in the two conditioning regimen. So let's briefly move to the end of the talk and just introduce you to studies regarding the haplo. This is in the haplo with the use of post-transplant cyclophosphamide from the Baltimore group, recently published in BBMT. Small number of patients, 16, refractory to different treatments, treated with cyclophosphamide, 50 milligram per kilo intravenously on day +3 and +4, plus GCSF, and GVHD prophylaxis carried out with mycophenolate and tacrolimus. All patients are alive, 2 out of 16 GVHD, viral reactivation just in 2, no clonal disease, follow-up 21 months, so really promising. This is a retrospective study with some selection bias, so again, I would say that not everything is gold what shines. This is another interesting study, which has been carried out by a Chinese group, 52 children with unmanipulated haplo, mixed of bone marrow and peripheral blood cell plus GCSF. Some patients, this transplant given as salvage, some as upfront. Overall survival 84, event-free survival 82, acute GVHD 13, chronic 34, which is exceedingly high. And the follow-up is reasonably long for a transplant study. So this cartoon shows that there are no difference in patient treated upfront versus patient treated as a second line, so as a rescue treatment. But as I pointed out before, GVHD is 34%, which is extremely high. So commenting on the haplo, overall looks like a good salvage option for a refractory patient without matched sibling donor and matched unrelated donor. Of course, anybody's got a donor, so this means that catching a donor is easier and faster. GVHD is still a problem. Alpha-beta T-cell depleted strategies are very much promising. I know that you're carrying them out in this fantastic center. I discussed that with Professor Marchand yesterday, and he told me that he also is very happy with the results he has. But I think it's too early to consider that as a frontline option because we don't have solidly published data. So this is the algorithm we use, diagnosis, I said. If you have an HLA sibling donor in the family, then go straight forward for the transplant. If you don't, and you start the unrelated donor search, and if you think that the transplant is feasible within 2 to 3 months, go for transplant. If you don't find the chance of doing the transplant, then go for immunosuppression with Darcam and cyclosporin A, is the classical scheme. Evaluate response at months +4. If you don't get response or you get relapse, then go for the unrelated donor transplant because you've already had to start the research at diagnosis. If you find a donor, also 9 out of 10, do the transplant. If you don't, you can repeat immunosuppression, either with rabbit or horse ATG. If you don't get response or relapse, then you can shift to Eltrombopag, to experimental transplant like cord blood and Campath. So I would like to thank quite a number of people who contributed to the data that I have shown. Marta Pilon and Elisa Carraro from the pediatric clinic in Padova, Suji Samarasinghe from the GOSH group, UK colleagues within the EBMT program, all my dear friends within the EBMT office, and particularly Professor Regis-Paul de Latour, who is my secretary in the working party, of course the EBMT centers, patients and their families, and I cannot avoid to thank my fantastic group. This is virtually all the team I work with in my hospital in Geneva. But honestly, my big spasiba is for you. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, профессор Дюфор. У нас нет времени, но такой интересный доклад, что у нас есть время на один вопрос или комментарий.
В вашем последнем слайде вы указали на GCSF как сопровождение при первом курсе АТГ в течение 30 дней. Хотя ни одно из исследований не показало преимущество реципиентов GCSF. Мы в своей практике также рутинно применяем его. Вот если можно прокомментировать, почему все-таки GCSF включается как третий препарат?
Honestly, the Andretically study published in Blood 2011, which was a prospective randomized trial, GCSF turned out to increase neutrophil within the first 30 days of treatment, and this is the reason why we still include that. And the second reason is that was able to identify those patients who afterwards were responding. So we have data, prospective randomized control data showing this.
Actually, and do you have any data about the pegylated GCSF?
Right, good. Thank you for asking that. We published recently our experience in severe congenital neutropenia. In severe congenital neutropenia, non-transplant setting, I think is a good alternative to patients for not responding to GCSF, but I have no experience, and I'm not aware of large experience of pegylated GCSF in aplastic anemia. Maybe you have.
Yeah, actually, we've shown that it circulates more than 3 weeks in those who don't respond.
Right.
Yeah, it's very convenient.
Yes, it is.